it really was a destruction that opened up something within my sphere that opened up all the pain that I never felt in my life. And so it could have looked like that it was the pain that I was experiencing because of the breakup. But what I recognized today was like I really felt like I was being eaten by rats at the time. I really recognized that it was all the pain that I'd never, ever, that I'd protected myself from the historic space of my life experience. And so for the first time, I was vulnerable enough to feel. And I did not think that I was going to get through that.
Welcome, Marie-Louise, on the Joyful Mate podcast. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me, Anthony.
You're welcome. Thank you for putting aside the time to enlighten the listeners. This podcast is all about helping the listeners find more joy, fulfillment, happiness, and purpose in their lives. And you certainly have the credentials, expertise, and experience to do that. Before we get into talking about this evolution of self, I'm really keen for you to share with the listeners your background and how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
Quite a big question, really, isn't it? When you look at how we all operate in the world and the little micro moments that shape us and define us in different ways that we come to the positions that we are. They're often little surprises or notes along the way, like little breadcrumbs, I've got a really cool analogy around that, when I look at a flower and I see all the water drops that create the flower. And, is it the first one? Is it the last one? But in my view, it's all of the drops that created, a certain expression of the flower. And that is absolutely a big awareness in my own experience of defining my expression as I move through the world today and the love that I have for what I do. And it has been a lot of little water drops, whether it was, being brought up in a family with 8 kids and, the great gifts of having a beautiful child, a long-term relationship, and the little gestures of a teacher when you're 4, or all of those things. And then the experiences of the dissonance also, which I talk to, those impact moments that created the nervous system to behave in the way it did. Most definitely, the expression of experiencing, processing long-term sexual abuse, the impact of deep grief, teenage rape, and learning the frames in which I saw and sensed the world through has been an evolution. And that's probably why the experience of giving attention to evolving or expressing myself in ways that were more full and wholesome became a real deep dive of my own. I was a little girl. In my teenage world, my beautiful mum who looked after 8 kids, experienced bipolar, and that was a real impact or navigation of wanting to fix, and research. But in the awareness of how I understand the operating system today, I recognize, it was a real driving force of wanting to fix myself, or the reflex of service, or all of these different layers. And so in answer to your question in how I distribute or come to what I'm doing today is a big body of work of process, which I love to share the lens through, is that life is process and almost like a landscape or an architecture that we're building upon. And, depending on where your attention is where the fabric of what picture you're painting becomes your experience. And more deeply on what those life experiences have evoked or provoked within how I move in the world, it most definitely opened the door to my relationship with my nervous system. And I really recognize that many of my ways I moved into the world, I was operating on a fear, or fight, flight or freeze was on a lot. Now, that was very unconscious, and those unconscious patternings were very deeply ingrained, And then when I saw I was operating on fear, and I literally was processing one through the body that came through deep grief, And my whole adrenal center was just shaking and my nervous system was shaking. And then images of, moments in time where fear was really impacted in my psyche. I was just like, what is going on? And it was a really deep insight into the body holding the memory, or the somatic parts of our experience holding the memory of those moments before. And then that became a hunger. I was like, where else don't I know? Where else don't I know? And so, yeah, I could say that in the experience of process and the insight that awakens through integration of those survival mechanics and also the thriving mechanics that are also here within the skin, it became a self perpetuating intrigue and inquiry and practice and process. And I just loved what it awakened in it. And, the depth of intelligence that moves through the body blows my mind. And I suppose my drive as a reflex of service really was navigated on, well, how do I share this with other people? I mean, wouldn't it be great if, humans, we all collectively understood that our body mind isn't supposed to be operating only in the survival mechanics, and it has a window into the thriving aspect of its intelligence. And I suppose that was just what drove and what inspires and continues to inspire. And yeah, I just really love what I do and I'm grateful. So the story is many stories, and I'm too, but it's funny.
I
That has brought me here.
I just love how you own and are grateful for all the experiences, no matter how they were at the time or how you saw them at the time. And you see them as shaping who you are today, and you wouldn't be who you are today without those experiences. And that level of awareness, as you said, that evolution, that thrival or transcendent self has been a journey, as you said, of process. And that's what life is. It's constantly evolving and transforming if we allow it to. Obviously, we can get stuck in that survival mentality and that victim mentality, which is very much attached to that survival mentality. Now, I'm really keen, because you've had plenty of these experiences that could have
Mm,
got you stuck in that survival mentality, and I'm a victim of this and that, and the world is unfair and poor me and I deserve better, all this sort of stuff. Whereas
mm,
you've let go of that, you've accepted the experience for as it is. You saw it as shaping you and you've managed to transcend the experience. What's the process for helping someone out there that may be feeling that way right at this point in time? I know it's obviously a long process and it probably depends on the individual, but I'm really keen on some tips or some insights that you can share that may just help that micro movement, I think you said, or micro
mm.
decisions, or just to help them get started.
Yeah, I suppose people who are listening to your podcast in the intrigue of happiness, or the intrigue of joy, have hit that point of curiosity. And sometimes I do see that, sometimes we have to hit our life truck before we actually give it attention. It's a bit like I'm eating the sugar, and then I get a pimple on my face. And then you go, oh, it must have been that last cookie. But no, it was a stacking process of the cookies, and then all of a sudden expressing itself with a pussy pimple. Now, in my understanding and how I see the organism or the whole organism, the ego or the subjective lens in which we're conditioned to perceive our life through sometimes needs to be rattled before it will go, okay, I'm curious now. And, so I say, when there's chaos, there's sometimes great change. Okay. Now, our body's talking to us all of the time, and our mind loves what it knows. So it will stay in those patterns of limitations, or the patterns that we've learnt, absorbed from our culture, absorbed from the beliefs of our ancestors, absorbed from the environment in which we live. And they become the condition which creates whoever I call Marie Louise. And then I get so safe in that little Marie Louise kind of jacket, so to speak. And sometimes there comes to a point in your life where you're ready to blow out of that jacket. And in answer to your question, it is a big question. It doesn't come in 3 tips. I know that everyone wants quick solution, and I would love to be able to say, this is your answer. However, the person is ready when they're ready for their curiosity. And I really do believe that the more awareness happens within human beings as culture, more the children are just naturally curious, because we're born curious, we're born hungry. But someone who finds themselves in your podcast where they're curious about happiness, well, my attention always is that one of the greatest keys that I discovered for my own expression and to be able to express itself fully in the untangling of those beliefs and processes was becoming aware and present to my body. Body awareness is probably one of the greatest of anchors. And you go, yeah, but I am present to my body because I'm here. I can't be anywhere else. And it's very true. However, where we have got such a bias in the frame of where our energy goes, and our energy often is dictated by our mind's eye. And our mind is very good architecture it is born to think. It's an amazing thinker of the future and an imaginer, a memory of the past. However, I look at the organism as a full body of a physical expression, emotional expression, psychological patterning, and spiritual. They're not separate to each other. Whereas as we've come in, as the thickening of the neocortex has moved and we've created more bias to its faculties of thinking of the future and remembering the past, collecting data, collecting memory, we've felt that is our intelligence. However, recognizing that our emotions speak through our body, I can feel someone hurt me in my heart, and I literally, if I'm aware, I can feel it in my skin. So there was a time where people thought, oh, you're just emotional. But when you recognize that the biology of emotion moves in through the body's organism. And so becoming present to the body has been an amazing anchor for one hint of idea. But I suppose I would give attention into just keeping up the curiosity of researching yourself. I wrote a book, which is Discover Worlds Within, where I really do feel that we are our own gurus. We have the intelligence of our own medicine. We've got an incredible organism that is coherent when the mind has a certain balance to it, and the availability of, we've seen ourselves as separate to nature, but the intelligence of nature, we are nature, and the biology of the system's intelligence is profound. And, I'm just this chick off the street who really has an incredible understanding of the biology of the whole system. And that has come through curiosity or the hunger or going inside. And I really value the technology that awakens through those processes, because even though it took a life truck for me to navigate inwardly, I didn't always recognize the patterns of my past as being gifts that brought me here. That has been a process, and it's not easy to do, to say to someone, oh, you'll be thanking those gifts later. Don't you worry. No way, mate. It's like, get stuffed. That's just terrible. But what's really quite profound is that when a person decides to be curious about their intelligence as a whole, rather than dissecting the human as something separate to itself, we separate our mind, we separate our heart, we separate the kidneys. We say we get a kidney specialist in, and that's amazing, but everything we do to the kidney affects our heart. Everything that we do with the thought affects the physical body. the patterns of our history, you know, our grandfather's nose sits on our face, you know, the different patternings, you know, accumulate, and there are gifts in those patterns and there are things that don't serve us. And where the beauty rises is when individuals like myself become curious about how they can start to drive the ship, you know, or drive the vehicle as such. You know, we've been blessed, totally blessed, to experience life through the five senses. And we're not always here for it because we're in our head, or, you know, we're not here for the experience of what's happening. And we put on our bravado and we ignore it and show up. And, you know, that hasn't been something that we've supported our children to do. And so the culture is operating under a condition rather than in its coherence of evolutionary processes. And I think that the intelligence of the human expression has some gifts to express as we kind of like, you know, allow ourselves to be holy. WHOLLY.
Yeah. I just on the awakening and that awareness piece, you know, you said is at some point you become aware and the universe smacks you in the face, or as you put it, the truck just whacks you in. Just that moment for you, if you don't mind sharing, you don't need to share it, you don't have to share it, but I just thought it you know, there'll be a listener out there that could benefit from having that relatable story.
Yeah. Well, I was married for 22 years, and in my view of my identity was really wrapped around who I was as a partner, who I was as a mother. And then it did really hit me in the guts and when we broke up, and I wasn't, you know, there was many signs, you know, that were there, but it really was a destruction that opened up something within my sphere, that opened up all the pain that I never felt in my life. And so it could have looked like that it was the pain that I was experiencing because of the breakup. But what I recognized today was like I really felt like I was being eaten by rats at the time. And I really recognized that it was all the pain that I'd never, ever, that I'd protected myself from the historic space of my life experience. And so for the first time, I was vulnerable enough to feel. And I did not think that I was going to get through that. And so that my body was just like broken and everything about life was dismantled. And the heaviness, or that literal feeling of feeling like my body was being eaten by rats was visceral. And so then I was like, I never knew that emotional pain could be so painful. And it was like, you know, you're being torn apart. And I was like, my gosh, I'd spent my whole life really observing human behavior as an awareness. And there were many different things that I'd done through my life because of that, because of my life circumstances. And whether it came around from not being good enough or feeling all of those things just forever, or sexual abuse, or all of the patterns that kept me in a container that I've got my shit together. And then the facade of no longer having my shit together, you know, like it was like, boom. And, and so the process of that was phenomenal. And, you know, remember the moment where I didn't think I could take the pain anymore. And I just squeezed my body so, so tight. And I was squeezing everything. It was like I was squeezing everything that I ever could to stop the pain. I really wanted it to stop. And I had this millisecond of silence. And that millisecond of silence, well, it felt like eons. But I don't know really how long it was, but it felt like eons. But then I had the experience of being in the pain again, you know, like it was. And then I was like, oh my gosh. And then I just squeeze my body and then I feel my body. And then that brought me to micro moments of coming into my body. Now, in that experience of my time through that window, there were moments I'd be walking in the street and someone would talk to me, and I had a great mask in my life where, "Hi, how you going?" And I'd talk, but I wasn't hearing anything. I wasn't hearing anything. I was totally not hearing, but I was smiling. Yeah, no, all is good, all is good. And then those moments I'd squeeze my hand and I'd feel my hand because my body was being eaten. That's what it felt like. It's a really incredible process. And then it just brought me to my hand and I had millisecond, and those milliseconds built, and it created distance from the mental perpetuation or the mental noise of the physical. And it brought me here. And those micro moments attained distance. And I awareness awoke up from that. And then another time where I'd become very present to my body, and I was in a conversation with my son, and he said, "Shut up," and my body froze. And I could now we like each other, but it was a response, and I've got a smile on my face, and I've gone, and he was a boy that loves me, and I've gone, "Oh, okay, guys, well, I'm going to go to bed." And I've frozen, yeah, and I've gone to bed. And I'm just squeezing my hands and feeling my body and saying, "Well, why can't you speak?" Because my response today would be something like, "Hey, man, that's not cool. I don't appreciate being spoken to like that. Is there something that you need to talk to me about?" However, my reactivity was freeze. And so I went into the bedroom and I'm just feeling and I'm crying and I'm feeling. And then it was like a Rolodex of all the moments in time where I'd been told to be quiet, and I'm quite naturally expressive. So, the experience of and the performance in which I'd embodied because of those survival mechanics. And then the next morning, you have to learn to speak, you learn to speak. And I'm standing, my poor son, I don't know what therapy he's gone for after it, because I think it was like 18 or whatever at the time, or 19. And I'm his mother in front of him, and I'm going, "Last night when you told me," and I'm really crying, and adrenaline was coming through my body and my legs were shaking. And this is to a young man that loves me. And he's like looking, going, "What did I say?" Like, "What? I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "This is just me learning how to speak." Can you believe it? Anyway, so in that process of experiencing the adrenaline, and this is old adrenaline, of the body had stored. And now I didn't know the insightful things that awaken through processing and untangling what's held in the skin of the somatic memory. But what did expose itself was that the operating system had released a lot. And I was like, I could see more, I could sense more, and more vibrancy was starting to move through my skin. And I was lighter. I felt a million kilos lighter. You can imagine, right? So then here I was, and I'm walking through the world, and things were starting to look shiny. And I've gone, where else don't I know that I don't know that I don't know? Became my adventurous, adventure. Innately, I see an adventurous human as I look through my own eyes. And that adventure was really, and I also see someone that was very courageous, was willing to go in and lean in and look and inquire. But the things that unfolded from that curiosity then allowed the nervous system to calibrate. I call that, it was a calibration or a sense of coherence. And it discharges the natural phenomena of the organism itself. It knows how to process rubbish. It knows how to process shit. It knows how to process the stuff from in the gut, both emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And the thing that gets in the way of it is the persona that doesn't allow us to see differently. And so I was very curious as to where else I didn't know what I didn't know, and I went on the hunt. And so then that opened me up to many practices and processes that allowed the metabolizing of certain patterns within the system. Now, in the field of modern psychology, and it's being dismantled a lot now with the work from Deutsch, and it's really where the processes are starting to change through the psychotherapy, whereas the modern psychotherapy had been to talk about stuff all the time. Now, in my experience of process, there was a window where I needed to evolve the flow that moved through my both vocals and my groin. And that came through learning how to speak, but it came through learning movement, and it's a much faster process. Whereas I think if you're still using just the memory as a therapeutic process, you're kind of repatterning the same story. Whereas the invitation here is that I can use many modes of wisdom that allows the organism to awaken to its own intelligence, So that became really those moments and many moments. And that's what I like, all the watering can. It just evokes more of our natural expression. And forgive me if I'm going on a rant, but I really do feel this is an opportunity where, if I look into a child's eyes, and a child's been born and then they're expressing themselves, their natural phenomena is to express in a way. And their natural state is laughing and joy, and they're looking with curiosity. And it's not to say we all want to be through the lens of that child, but we have a quality within us that is still part of that. It's not separate to us, but we just lose it because of the conditioning and the beliefs and all of those things. So what I love to support humans to do is not only support the process of metabolizing the limitations, but also stepping in to the expansion of who we are in our flow and in our coherence. And I think that there's really clever tools to do that. Yeah, really amazing.
And what are some of the profound tools that have stood out for you that you apply in your work?
So, like the great gifts of the yogis have been that they've, dove into self-inquiry for thousands of years. It was a value system that held very high within their culture. And so within that experience of just listening to myself more, I found myself in serendipitous moments of, I was at a talk and there was a guy talking and he was doing yoga, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll give that a crack. And so then I go and do the processes of yoga as of an experience, more of a workout at the time. But in my opening up, it became a lot of a deeper path. And I wouldn't say that I'm from the awareness isn't fully in the system of yoga, but the true nature of yoga is realized within this skin. So what does that mean? It's like the recognition of who I am truly at my core, bound by the condition of the expression of the limitation of the physical, which is really quite gorgeous. It's quite liberating and freeing. And so many of the practices within the philosophy I find very powerful. And so movement became a big part. And I give movement to all the qualities of movement, but hopefully being able to move your spine as one of them. And that's coming through dance. It comes through, anywhere which floats your boat. But doing, cat cow allows the very primal brain to flex up. The nervous system has all these little tentacles on them and receiving information. And if that spine is malleable, then the mind is malleable, because the receivership of the organism is highly intelligent and is receiving information in every millisecond. Like a little lizard on a rock, he senses the bird in the tree. Well, our bodies do the same. So becoming connected more deeply with that awareness, well, then our hypersensitivity is part of that. And someone who has experienced trauma as a child or is living quite in a fight, flight, or freeze response, their hypersensitivity to the world around them is very acute, but they're just not knowing how to, bring regulation to the system. And so, in the gift of what happens in a human that discovers coherence in the vessel, their grief ends up being some of their gifts. Yeah. So, that's quite amazing. And so movement is a very big key in which I would share. Education is a key, be hungry about how the mechanics of this incredible body works, like listening to podcasts, reading books. I often say that, well, I actually had this epiphany when I was learning how to fly planes, and I was in the aircraft, and my teacher was next to me, and we're going through all of the checklists. Now, there were so many checklists when you drive in a plane, and one of the core things is that, well, you've got to be careful because your life's at risk. And, your life's at risk. And I was like, oh my God, it's so funny that we are in this incredibly sophisticated piece of like vehicle, and we don't know how to drive it. We're just being dictated by this mind that takes us into crazy places. And, we have no idea of what the kidney's doing. We've got no idea of, different protocols. We just take it for granted. And, and then we expect it to show up for us. And of course, we're crashing into walls. And of course, a human vessel can be quite destructive. And, we see people, little boys in men's suits who can press a button and explode things. They're people who are literally immature in their emotional and psychological development. And so it's like, okay, well, how is it that this operating system functions? So education is a really cool one, and your checklist, have your protocols and, what can you do? One of the great realizations too was so funny for me, because I was always trying to fix myself, it wasn't good enough. Self-love was really, really poor, and learning to fall in love with who I am as I move through the world, whether it was, the funny thing is about self-love is people think, oh, you got to love everything, but well, you've actually got to, what I've discovered is that the parts that you really don't like about yourself is, you look at it with softness and kindness, and, you bring those qualities home back into you. And it's a real amazing process of integration and kindness to the self, and it just expresses yourself in a different way. And that's been mind-blowing. Falling in love with myself has been it doesn't mean that you're perfect. You're actually falling in love with the imperfection,
Absolutely. The griefs become the gifts.
Yeah, right?
My
And
grandfather
so, yeah,
knows. I've got my grandfather's nose. And as a kid, obviously, anything that stands out, people, can see it. They, it stands out, right? So they'll say comments about it. And constantly I was getting comments around my big nose and all sorts of associations with that.
it's so funny.
And it was interesting. I then, as I went, but yeah, early 20s, went into Asia. And obviously in Asia, they've all got small noses. So the big nose really stands out, right? But for them, because they didn't have it, what you don't have, you think, you sort of fantasize over having and how good it would be, right? And so for them, it was an attraction. So like, it was as much as I was getting hassled at school and challenged at school around my big nose, in Asia, it was a standout attraction. I was like, wow, that this is good. And so just those little, and as you shared earlier on is, this perceptions and subject interpretation of the world and expanding that lens. And obviously your siblings help you expand the lens of the world before you actually really ventured into the world, which is amazing. So I just find this like a full circle moment in the fact that you just mentioned falling in love with parts of yourself. And as you said before, finding the gift in the grief, or, like it's, I've certainly had that journey myself. And I think everyone, or certainly everyone can relate to that, because there's parts of us that make us stand out. And for whatever reason at the time, we might not want to stand out for those reasons. But as you said, they are a gift.
Well, they can be, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. It is just the great gift of, seeing. I think that's where positive psychology has probably been a bit mismanaged, of wanting to be positive about things. Now, I had a survival mechanics reflex of flipping to the positive. That was a survival mechanics. That was an automated system. You go, oh, well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing, Marie. And I'm like, not in realization. It's those automated patterns that just go on, and it overrides actually feeling. And where the great gift of existence is that we have this relationship with the world right now in our experience of the world through our feeling body. And for me to deny feeling sadness or fear or anger because I had this positive reflex, or guilt or shame, which I was so engrossed by shame as an experience, it doesn't allow me to, well, it didn't allow me to experience the full capacity of joy or ecstasy, and the full spectrum of the colors that light up a human's life is their ability to be able to have full freedom and flow of those things. And it's a really incredible journey. And thanks for sharing the aspect around your grandfather, because it's a very, very cool experience to go and see it being revered. And that's the great space of perception, isn't it? And the
It is.
culture in which we're birthed through.
It's like you mentioned, shame, and there's a lot of body shaming here in Australia. My brother lives in Africa, in Uganda, and big bodies are like admired and desired over there. And so he said to me, he goes, if you got any clients with an eating disorder, just send them over here. Because and he shared with me an experience that he had some friends of his traveling, right, and there were two. I don't want to sort of label things here, but you say two very fit girls, and the other girl wasn't as fit or fit looking as what the other two were. And the those fit looking girls got a lot of attention in Australia, but when they went to Africa, they were ignored, and the other girl stood out, and all the guys wanted her. And so it was just like, as you say, this whole thing of our perceptions and our conditioning and society and all those sort of things. You can easily flip the lens at any point, or discover that flip lens and see the other side. As you said, it's not just thinking like with anything positive, there's a downside to it, and it's not separate. And as you said, there's we too much want to dissect things and think things are separate, but everything's ultimately interconnected. And I think that's what I loved about the conversation we've had today, is you've shared that interconnectedness, that wholeness, that integration of parts, that being dissected at that moment in time when you lost your identity to being a partner and that fell apart, and you're being eaten by rats, and then from that moment you started putting together back the pieces to experience the wholeness, and that's where you are now. And that's the work you do in terms of your program around Evolve Yourself and the book you've written. So I'd just love you to share some of the details of how the listeners can connect with you and work with you, essentially.
Amazing. Well, I love to work one-on-one clients coaching. So we do 6-month and 12-month programs, and also with organizations. So I love to go into organizations and supporting people to really get connected to their nervous system regulation. You did bring up that, what were the tools? And I went through 2, I think, but meditation and breath work are 2 keys: movement, education. And there's another one, but that's okay. And so it's a big body of work of practice, so that the somatic processing can take place, or education. And so then having that acute understanding. And so I love to, I'll leave the details, hopefully leave the details with you, my website, and anyone that's curious to support their team. You know, what I have seen in many organizations is that we operate often on fight flight, or, we're fighting for our job, we're fighting in different ways, and it's very unconscious. And so, but when a person moves into a thriving state and the organization is moving into a thriving state, the ability to have more intuition, the availability that opens up insight, new ideas. Because when we're in those other models or modes of awareness or modes of consciousness, we're actually operating in patterns that we've seen before. It doesn't allow the vessel to absorb the new. And so you can see it in creatives, or in elite sportsmen. Their bodies practice, 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 practice. Then their mind's got to get out of the way, and then the new, and then all of a sudden it looks like phenomenal. It looks like something superheroes do. However, it's available for all humans depending on where your attention wants to thrive. And I get excited about that for organizations for sure. So that requires an individual to have nervous system awareness, because then we break down the unconscious, and it requires practices. You can't do that intellectually. That's where I have programs which is all about embodiment. So it gets your skin in the game. This makes, it's not, it does bring esoteric awareness or spiritual understanding to the skin. However, it's very grounded and practical. And I think sometimes the organism can seem very complex. But once the experiencer has a deep knowing of different things, it becomes simple. And I think that that's exciting. So, yeah, please, I think it's on a website. So
I'll certainly,
marielouise.com.
I'll share the link in the show notes, listeners. So just go directly to the show notes and you'll go to Marie Louise's website. I really just want to thank you once again for putting aside your time and enlightening the listeners with your wisdom, experience, and the great work you've done on self, which you now share with others. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's such an honor, and high five to you too in sharing the good juju. It's amazing. I love the attention you give to joy. It's something in my own fabric of history I'd give it to the dis-ease rather than how is it that I cultivate the joy. And learning that aspect really does give permission for that to happen. So it's really beautiful. I honor that in you.
Thank you. And to the listeners, please share it with others that could benefit from Marie Louise's message today and the wisdom that she shares. So please share it far and wide. And until next time, continue to experience joy in every moment.